Hello, welcome. For those of you I don't know, I'm Stephen Collins. I'm the CEO of Matter, and it's my pleasure to welcome Ezekiel Emanuel back to Matter for a conversation about his new book, Eat Your Ice Cream, best title ever, 6 Simple Rules for a Long and Healthy Life. So Zeke is one of the most thoughtful voices in healthcare today. In addition to his training as a physician, he has a PhD in philosophy. He's a practicing oncologist. He's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He is a prolific author. He's a health policy guru, helped develop Obamacare. And he's one of the most influential bioethicists in the world. He grew up in Chicago. He remarkably has 2 equally successful brothers, Ari and Ram. I will say that Ram, by the way, was very instrumental in getting Matter off the ground 11 years ago. So great debt to the Emanuel family. Neither his super agent brother nor his politician brother can claim to be an award-winning honey producer or an award-winning chocolatier, and neither one had an early, maybe brief, career as a reality TV star, and neither of them have written quite as many books as he has. I really enjoyed this book. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and please welcome Ezekiel Emanuel.
Wow, nice to be here.
Great to have you here. So I love this book, and before we get into the content of it, it's a book about health and wellness, and I have to just point out what you just had for lunch, which was 2 Chicago-style hot dogs and French fries.
Absolutely, got to have those dogs.
And we're going to have ice cream in a little bit, and it's called Eat Your Ice Cream. And as we'll talk about through this, it's a bit of a contrarian take on today's wellness fads.
Yeah.
But how do you square it?
Well, I mean, I have a dog or 2 or 3, once or twice a year at most. When I get back to Chicago and I have time to fit in a dog, they're wonderful, and you should have some pleasure. The nitrosamines in that hot dog, 1 or 2 or 3 of them aren't going to kill me. And ice cream actually turns out to be, at worst, neutral, and at best, good for you. There's a lot of data, and on this, I agree with the new RFK Jr. Dietary recommendations, that dairy is good. All the data are that there's, and I do mean all the data, that there's no real difference health-wise between full fat and low fat, yet the government has for 20, 30, 40 years suggested low fat. Ice cream is a dairy product, and lots of protein in there, lots of other good vitamins, calcium, and vitamin D. The problem with ice cream or gelato or whatever your favorite is that it's got sugar. But again, in moderate amounts. It's also, dairy is associated with low risk of diabetes type 2, which they don't want to pay attention to. Well, how does dairy get you low? Yeah, it does. It seems to protect you from diabetes, probably through the microbiome. It's also been associated with low colorectal cancer. So there are lots of good reasons. And again, I'm not recommending ice cream every night. 2 or 3 times a week, perfectly fine. I bless it. Since I wrote this book, lots of people who I've known say, 9 o'clock, scoop of ice cream, right? It's my nightcap, basically. I said, great. If it works for you, that's perfect.
Well, I'm glad we're recording this for my wife, because I make ice cream. I love ice cream. Wow. And she's like, you can't eat that much ice cream. And now from the doctor's mouth.
Right. Totally legitimate.
It's totally legit. So you said that you wrote this book in large part because you were pissed off.
Yes.
What happened, and is this what happens when Emanuels get pissed off? Yeah.
Depends which Emanuel, right? One Emanuel will write, the other Emanuel will scream at you. There are actually 3 streams that go into the book, and the proximate cause really was the fact that I finished my teaching for the fall semester in fall 2023 in December, and the finals hadn't come in and grades weren't due, and someone had sent me Peter Attia's Outlive. I sat down and read it, and it just made me as pissed as you could be. And so I sat down for the next 3 weeks and wrote 35,000 words, which was the first draft of the book. That was the spark, as it were. Before the spark, I had been at a Lazard conference where I was talking, and the first question was from Ariana Huffington, who said, "Why isn't there any wellness in medical schools? Why aren't they teaching doctors wellness?" And I basically said to, there are two reasons. One, there's no way doctors, hospitals, drug companies are making money on it, and so no one's got an incentive to push it. Basically, it's really simple. And this was well before Attia and the whole thing took off. It's really simple. There are just 6 things you do, and it's like this isn't complicated. I don't know why you need much more education. So that, and then the third thing, which goes back even further, is I'm a doctor. What happens to doctors? Oh, doctor, what diet should I be on? Oh, doctor, what should I take? Is this medicine good? And then, of course, I have a brother, which you don't know, but I would say almost weekly I get a call. What do you think about this? Should I take it? I look into it. I said, probably not going to kill you, but there's no evidence it's good for you. He probably takes about half my advice. So that has been going on for decades. And so it was that, lots of people have these questions. It was Ariana Huffington tell me, and, my delineating the 6. And then, finally with Peter Attia, we got to fix this problem because there's so many misconceptions about wellness.
So now when your brother calls you, you can not answer. You can be like, read the book.
No, my brother calls me, and he's after the first day it was on the market, he calls and he says, you're going to be on the New York Times bestseller list, but I just want to tell you about the advance I got for my book. And then the other brother says, well, I wrote this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, and they just told me that 282% more clicks on my op-ed than the average op-ed. And he said, I still don't know how many more clicks I got than you. Okay.
Not competitive at all.
No, not competitive.
All right. Well, the book came out last week.
Yeah.
How are sales going? And how's it?
I shouldn't brag, but I will. I think I find Chicagoans a little too modest. We have to thumb our nose at the New Yorkers every so often. So I think we sold the most books of any book this week. The important point is we sold more than Andrew Ross Sorkin's 1929. So anyway, it's been incredibly gratifying sales.
So other than Matter's promotion engine around this event,
yeah,
like why do you think it's selling? Why is it resonating with people?
I think it is just part of it is because it's resonating, because all of those wellness books, Attia is just one of many, Andrew Huberman and David Sinclair and all of these people, and I think they appeal to a certain cohort. But I think there's been I don't want to use this language because it offends my politics, but there's been a silent majority out there where it's like, this is ridiculous, but no one's speaking about wellness that I can understand and I want to do. It's too extreme, but I don't have someone who's, here's a reasonable approach and don't sweat the details. And I think that's what I'm trying to respond to, because I think it's right. Let me just say, so if I had to say, there's a lot of different strands of the philosophy, but one of them is, look, if you're really going to do wellness, right, you're going to have to do it for decades, right? I don't know what the average age in this room is, but call it 40, right? You're going to live till 80, and probably most of you are actually going to live till 90. That's 5 decades, okay? And if you're going to follow the wellness stuff, it's 5 decades, it's 50 years. This idea that you're going to pay attention to how many grams of this you do, or, is that squat, is the angle here 90 degrees? That's like nonsense, right? So it has to be something you can do every day or every week, right? You can have fun doing it because otherwise you won't keep it up. None of you have, as strong as you are, none of you have enough willpower to keep it up if you hate it, right? It shouldn't be about self-denial. So you have to make it work. And that's one of the key philosophies. That's why, eat your ice cream. Yeah, right. Why resist? Why spend all that willpower resisting that beautiful ice cream cone when you can eat it and put it within a context where everything is balanced? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear through the book that one of your philosophies is not to completely obsess over your health and wellness. And you have a bunch of examples of what that obsession looks like. I'm going to read one of them because I find it entertaining. And then you're sort of a counterpoint to that, which is much more practical and accessible. And I think that probably is why it's resonating. But I do want to, so at the peak of obsession, there's an entrepreneur who built a company which is in this building, and he sold it. And you don't name him by name, but he says, and then there's the entrepreneur attempting to defy death with his daily regimen of 100 pills, cold plunges, infrared lights, and a daily serving of nutty pudding, a mix of chia seeds, macadamia nuts, and berries. Nutty is right. You don't mention this, but he also measures his erections every night, and quantifies everything. And so I use that. I mean, it's obviously
here's my story about
example.
That guy.
Okay.
All right. My brother, the Hollywood one, the famous one and successful one, runs a conference. Runs a conference every year in September, and this book was done. It was off getting printed, and said person and I were seated next to each other at dinner. Not by accident, I assure you. And so, he's actually quite a nice guy. And so we got talking, and I said, I think what you're saying is crazy. And so I said, I just want to ask you one question. Why do you want to live to 150 or 75 years? Silence. Then he turns to another person. He says, I'm the most monitored person in all of human history. That turns out not to be an answer to my question, right? And he didn't have an answer to my question, because if that's your goal, it's an insane goal. Look, why do we want to be healthy and well, right? Whatever your larger goal in life is, right? That's why you want to be healthy. But being healthy and well is not the goal of life. It's a lifestyle to make the goals of life matter. I'm a philosopher, as you mentioned, or at least I have training in philosophy. I'm not a philosopher. I have training in philosophy. It's like confusing the means for the end. And this is very common, but it's the problem of the wellness industrial complex, that they want to make you focus on the means as if that were the focus of your life. And Peter Thiel has another line, which I do also quote in the book, the only goal is to outlive. Bullshit. Just utter nonsense.
I love that they seated the guy who wants to not die next to the guy who said he wants to die at age 75.
We made a bet that night. I bet him that he's not making it, and we're both putting it in our will. So,
but you will live past 75.
Well, first of all, I have 8 years to go. There are plenty of ways of dying between now and then that are purely accidental.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of dying.
Yes.
The first chapter of your book is called "Don't Be a Schmuck."
Yes.
Which I think is my second favorite chapter title of any book I've ever read. And you mention a bunch of schmucky things.
Right.
Smoking, vaping, too much drinking, texting while driving, tanning salons, colonic cleanses, base jumping. There's a list. And so I want to ask you about a couple of them.
Yeah.
I assume we don't have any base jumpers in the.
You might.
I guess you never know.
So honestly, I thought base jumping was the schmuckiest thing. I was sitting there. How am I going to end this chapter? Right? I'm going to end this chapter the schmuckiest thing I could imagine, and that was base jumping. But when you research it, it turns out not to be the schmuckiest thing.
And?
Yeah. So base jumping, your risk of dying in base jumping is 1 in 2,700 roughly jumps, right? You know what base jumping is? This puzzled face. Yeah, thank you for, it's, you got this big Michelin Man squirrel suit with the things there, and you jump off a mountain, no parachutes, no propulsion, no nothing. You're at the whim of the winds, and if the winds are going to come and smash you into the mountain, you're a goner, right? Or if the winds are, going down, you're a goner. I don't understand the appeal, but I thought this was the schmuckiest thing you can do. It is not even close, okay? Spending $100,000 to climb Mount Everest is very schmucky, okay? The mortality rate for all climbers, mountaineers, Sherpas, tourists, 1 in 100. And if you're over 59, which I see at least 1 or 2 people in this audience are, it's 1 in 25. And by the way, your body's staying up there. No one's spending 1 bit of oxygen bringing you back down. Okay? That's pretty schmucky. And then, turns out, that's not even the schmuckiest thing you can do. The absolute schmuckiest thing you can do, as far as I can tell, is to be president. We've had 45 men as president. We've had 4 assassinated in office. For those of you who don't do math in your head, that's 1 in 11 chances of dying. We had Lincoln, McKinley, Garfield, and JFK. And by the way, there have been 8 successful assassination attempts where they've gotten off a bullet or something that might not have hit the person. Sometimes they did, like Ronald Reagan. Sometimes they miss the person they're aiming at, like FDR, but they kill the mayor of Chicago, Cermak, right? We've had 8 more of those. So I don't know. Being president is pretty schmucky.
Well, I will say, as we're sitting here
I don't have anyone in mind, by the way.
As we're sitting here in Chicago, if there's someone who does still listen to your advice, and he wanted to maybe come back to a role in Chicago, we would take him.
Okay. I'll let him know.
Alcohol.
Yeah.
So you present a lot of data on alcohol in the book, and it's not as clear as smoking.
No.
And so what's the takeaway for people?
Well, alcohol is
drinking?
It's a little more complicated. It used to be a glass of red wine a night is, going to keep you healthy. It's the French paradox. They eat all this full fat food and they have this glass of wine and that's how they're protected. They don't have heart disease. Probably not true. Well, there's no evidence that it is true. So alcohol has gone through these positives and negatives. In general, from a physical standpoint, drinking alcohol is not good for you. It causes all sorts of problems. You know about the liver problems, cirrhosis of the liver, transplant necessary. It's associated with much higher risk in 7 cancers, including breast cancer. It is associated with terrible disruption of your sleep at night, short sleep. Even though it makes you drowsy, it shortens the sleep. It gets rid of REM and deep sleep. So in general, not a good thing. There may be a group, older men above 55 who have cardiac disease may protect them by decreasing the chances of clotting. But it's led to a lot of recommendations that 0 is the right dose of alcohol. On the other hand, let's face it, we've been drinking alcohol since there have been humans. Turns out primates like alcohol too. They look for fermented fruits out there, and they like to eat them. Gets a little buzz. Turns out birds do too. So there's something in humans that like the buzz of alcohol. But most importantly, we use it to lubricate social interaction, right? So if that's a positive social interaction, and the negative is physical risk. Everything in life has some trade-offs. 65 to 70% of Americans drink. I don't happen to be one of them. My wife is. We're not going to 0, right? That's just unrealistic. So we have to be responsible. What does being responsible mean? No binge drinking. That's undisputably terrible for you, even if you're social. Don't drink alone. There's no social interaction if you're drinking alone. Third, don't drink to drown out your sorrows. It's not an effective way to drown out your sorrows, and it's bad for you because you're going to be alone. And obviously, don't drink and drive. So that's the way I would encapsulate it. If you're using it for social interaction, you have a dinner party, you serve alcohol, people are talking, and the whole evening is enjoyable, that is a good thing. That net is probably a very good thing for you.
Let's talk about social interactions, because that's the second chapter in your book, and I think it maybe is the most important one, and certainly the most different than most of the kind of wellness stuff that's floating around. So you write, no amount of kale or number of steps or hours of sleep can replace the importance of building and maintaining good relationships for wellness and longevity. When it comes to wellness, family, friends, and social interactions are not superfluous or nice to haves, but probably the most essential elements of wellness, longevity, and happiness. You cite a lot of data from studies all over the world. I mean, probably add them up, it's probably hundreds of thousands of millions of people studied. By the way, one of the things I like, another one of the things I liked about this book is there's a lot of data to dig into, but it never reads like an academic tome.
Thank you. I succeeded.
You succeeded. So what does the data say? And talk about the importance of relationships.
Yeah, it is. So one of the things that, again, pisses me off about the wellness industrial complex, and Peter Attia's book, this is actually the thing that, of all the things he did, this is the thing that made me the most mad. So you read 415 pages of this book, right? Big, heavy emphasis on exercise, for those of you who haven't read it. Very heavy emphasis. Emphasis a lot less on food and eating, and then some emphasis on sleep. And that's it. And then you get to the epilogue, or the afterword, I forget which he calls it, which is less than 2 pages. And he says, well, you know, you could be in great shape, but if your relationships suck, if your wife doesn't like you, you know, what's it worth? Well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock, right? The issue is, again, this is a means, not an end, and it turns out that social relationships are way more important than everything he's mentioned, and he doesn't even know that. He doesn't even look at the data. So there is an abundance of data. It's about 3 million people have been studied if you put it all together. Here are 2 or 3 different ways of looking at it. The Harvard Adult Development Study, have any of you heard of this? Oh, really? That's great. It's the most boring academic title you've ever heard. It basically followed Harvard sophomores from 1939 for a few years, and then combined that cohort, of which JFK and Ben Bradley, the Washington Post editor, were members, into some other less privileged kids from Boston who a different group was following, and then added the spouses and children, and followed them for now 85 years. And it turns out the single biggest predictor of those people who are healthy, those people who live the longest, and those people who are the happiest are good social relationships. So that's it's more qualitative. Yeah, they have about 2,000 people. If you look at the other data, there's a professor out of Brigham and Young University who looked at 148 studies, analyzed them all, and it turns out that being lonely and socially isolated is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. There's a study like the Harvard Adult Development Study in China, following 100,000 people, doing interviews with them as they go. And the people who get to be centenarians and everything, their family visits at least once a week, and often every single day. They're in groups playing mahjong and whatever the situation is, and lots of other studies. Being socially connected is worth reduces your mortality risk over the next 8 years, 22 to 30%. That's if you're typically over 55. All these studies are slightly different, but something like 1/4 to 1/3 of your risk reduced in the next 6 to 8 years by having close social relationships. That's pretty amazing in a very short period of time.
And loneliness actually affects your physiology, doesn't it?
Yes, right. Thank you for pointing that out. You know, people talk about social interactions. Yeah, it's good. It's good for you mentally. Wrong. It's good for your body. right? It's like, first of all, the mind, I don't know where you think the mind is, but it's in here, okay? And it turns out, social interactions leads to release of hormones in the brain. Oxytocin, the so-called love hormone that makes attachment for people, right, gets released when you have social interactions. Dopamine goes up. Your stress axis, that leads to secretion of cortisol hormones out of the adrenal glands, goes down and gets reduced. So it's good physiologically. Decreases your heart rate, decreases your blood pressure. It's very, very important.
So I don't want to, we are lonelier than ever.
Oh, it's terrible.
And I don't want to get, like, we could talk about social media and phones for like 4 hours. I don't want to get lost on that. But just why doesn't social media work? You're interacting with people.
Yeah.
Why doesn't it work?
So it does work, but it only works after you have an established relationship. And you cannot establish a relationship virtually. You have to do that really face to face. So an acquaintance, to make someone an acquaintance, requires about 60 hours of interaction, right? Where you talk to the person, etc. Having a close friend, someone who turns out to be a lifelong friend, that takes about 200 hours over a relatively short time, 4 to 6 months. And that typically, where do many of us establish our closest relationships? In college, right? You're spending a lot of time, midnight bull sessions, you're talking about things that you really care about, whether it's relationships or life aspirations or bitching about your parents, whatever it is, right? That's how you get a close friendship. You have to reveal something of yourself and you have to spend time. This idea that, well, I'm not so much worried about quantity of time, it's really quality of time. Guess what? You can't have quality of relationship without quantity. And you really, this is like a crazy idea. I could just parachute in and we can have a quality, deep discussion. No, you have to spend time with someone before they trust you, you trust them with, revealing yourself. And that's really what it's about. We have about 5 to 10 close friendships, people who we talk to every week or so. Then we have about 15 really close people who we talk to about once a month, have over to dinner. And then there's bigger group. And the number that is often associated with these things is called the Dunbar number. I don't know how many of you heard about it. He's a professor emeritus professor now at Oxford, and used the brain size of people to calculate, based upon primates and others, that we have about 150 people we know interact with, can recognize their name, recognize their face. That's the limit. And he has some really great data. That's how big villages were in England, way back when. That's how big fighting units are in the military. There's lots of things. So you have 150 people who you know. But the close group is somewhere around 15 to 25. And that's really important. Both groups are really important, by the way.
So in the book, you also there's another type of social interaction that is also really beneficial. And one of the characters that appears in your book is your father. And you talk about his approach to, I'm sure he had multiple layers, but one of his approaches to social interactions, and I'd like you to talk about his approach to strangers in particular.
Yeah. My dad was a pediatrician in Chicago. He knew about 5 or 6 languages, took care of the large immigrant communities in Chicago. And he is the paradigmatic extrovert. He talked to almost anybody and everybody. And so when he really liked car rides for vacations, and we used to drive out west to like Glacier National Park in Montana and the Badlands and all. And, every time we stopped for lunch at a diner, my dad we would sit down and he'd begin talking to the next table and finding out what's there to see here. Why do you live here? What's your aspirations? Where did your family come from? All of these questions. That's just how he loved to figure out what was going on in people's mind, what was good from their standpoint about their community, etc. And he would do this, also we go to the park, we'd be playing, and he'd be talking to someone else, or he'd make a diagnosis on some kid who was walking in some funny way, and go up to the mother, and typically mother, and say, I'm a doctor, but I think your son is walking a little funny, it might be something in the hip that can be fixed with the brace, and you should go to a doctor. That's who he was. And, you know, as a kid, you're like with him and you're like, talking again, just get me out of here, all right? It's like he's embarrassing me again, especially if there were other kids at that table. But that's who he was. And, you know, as a kid, it was very embarrassing. But I learned a lot of things from that. The first thing is, and, you know, this is sort of my dad's philosophy, is like, just start talking. They want to talk too. They're too shy, like most people, just too shy. You just talk. And you say, well, what do you talk about? Just ask a question. Simple question, right? So, you know, I get on a plane and I talk to the person next to me and say, why are you going to Chicago? You live there? You know, just start the conversation. Third, ask follow-up questions. It shows that you're interested. You've actually been listening. You know, this isn't just nonsense. And the last thing my dad showed, and this is the most important thing, I think, certainly for this generation, you know, I have a lot of students, this generation really needs to know, which is, my dad would always say, you know, if the other people just didn't want to talk, you know, it's like probably having a bad day, maybe something happened at the office, maybe someone got a terrible diagnosis that they're sort of dealing with. You know, it's not you. Don't take it personally, right? It's not, you're never going to see them again. It's not going to hurt your ego, right? If they go monosyllabic on you, and, you know, so go back to your book, you know, forget about it and just let the water, you know, float off you. And I think that actually, if I had to diagnose my students who are, you know, MBA undergrads at Penn, it's like they are so fixated. Someone's judging them all the time. It's like, you know, don't take yourself that seriously. It's just not that important. Start. So I'll give you my, you know, I have 3 research assistants. One of the research assistants, literally, I was just about to start the book tour last week, and he calls me up, or we're at team meetings. We have a team meeting for half an hour every day. And he says to me, you know, I went to this restaurant across the street from my house, a new place. He says, I'm sitting at the bar eating my burger. And I'm like, you know, I am not living the philosophy of the book I just worked on. And so he asked the person behind the bar, he says, you know, the place is brand new. Where'd you work before this? Found out in very short order, you know, she's working on a master's in health policy administration from Temple University. They talked for half an hour. And then the guy next to him chimes in and says, you know, you were in my film class at Penn and you used to talk all the time. And they begin talking about films. And he said he left after about 45 minutes feeling fantastic. That is called weak interactions, right? Super important. And we often go through our life not talking to people. So I make a habit of talking to the people next to me on trains, planes, wherever, talking to the barista. And, you know, I sort of say this in the book, which is Washington, D.C., you may not know this, but Washington, D.C. is the second biggest Ethiopian city in the world after Addis Ababa, right? There are more Ethiopians in Washington, D.C. than any other city but Addis Ababa. And they're all in the cab and Uber business, totally dominated. You get into a cab or an Uber, and overwhelming chance that person's from Ethiopia. So I get in, and you can recognize them. And I say, you know, you from Ethiopia? Yes. How did you know? And I say, well, I've been to Ethiopia 5 times, and this is a place. They light up. They are so happy. Someone's been to their home country. Someone knows where they're from. And, you know, we have a whole conversation about what's the situation in Ethiopia. You know, how much family do you still have back there? You know, it is really, it's amazing how much fun it is for you. And as I say in the book, it's also fun for them. You're being generous, virtuous, right? Because you're actually elevating their day as well.
I had that experience earlier today. I was in an Uber and I was chatting with a guy, and it turns out he's from Benin, which is a little tiny country in West Africa, where I happen to have been. And I told him that, and he was like, I mean, I thought he was gonna run off the road. He's like, I've been driving for 15 years. I've never met anyone who's from Benin. He's like, I'm never gonna forget this ride. And this. And I was like, God, that makes me feel really good.
Yeah, it makes you feel good. And he is like,
he's gonna go tell his whole people, like, wow, this guy's been.
It's a life-changing moment. Yeah. There are people in Chicago who's been to Benin. Yeah.
So you, I want to talk, you know, there's a lot of people who are very uncomfortable talking to strangers, and you sort of just alluded to that. And you say in the book, and you touched on this a little bit, and you say in the book, Wait, what's the worst thing that can happen? You could be perceived as a socially inept schmendrick.
Yeah.
And so two things. One, what are the differences between a schmuck and a schmendrick? And then second, like practical advice. I mean, there are a lot of people, they might be introverted, they're just not, it just doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. And so what's your advice to them other than just, get over yourself and, don't worry about it. Like, what are some practical things they can do to just kind of get started and break and build those muscles?
Well, first of all, we're sitting here in Chicago, and almost all the great research on spontaneously starting conversations, especially if you're an introvert, occurs at the University of Chicago. There's a guy named Nick Epley, I think is the way he pronounces his name. And he's done some of these great studies, which is go to a train station, recruit people, and tell them, all right, you're going to go into town, right? You're coming in downtown to work. You have to talk to someone on the train and report back about that, and do it for a week, every day for a week. And it turns out, whether you're extroverted or introverted, you like that train ride better when you've forced yourself to make conversation with someone else. And he's done this in many other kinds of circumstances where if you are an introvert, and about 25 to 30% of the population's introverted, you actually are more happy when you force yourself to act extroverted. Now, it is true that it might take more energy to do it when you're an introvert. My dad, it took no energy for him because he got energy from talking to people. Introverts, they get happier, but it does take energy. That's what you have to do. You have to actually put oomph into it and realize that it's going to pay off, and you are actually going to be happier at the end from forcing yourself to do this. Now, I have a whole long section about willpower, which is a whole topic in and of itself. It does require willpower from introverts that it doesn't from extroverts, but it is willpower that really pays off, and it doesn't pay off months into the future. It pays off right then and there. And again, if it's a fascinating area to look at, these sort of weak interactions. Epley is one of the greats. There are a few other people in England and in Canada who've done similar kinds of studies. But it's definitely the case that these short interactions, talking to a barista, talking to the Uber driver, talking to the person next to you on a train or a plane, all of those kind of interactions really make a difference. And again, as I say, to just ask a simple question. Like my research assistant, where'd you work before? I mean, what could be simpler than that question?
Nutrition.
Yeah.
Food, other than just, we could talk about ice cream, would be fine with me for the next hour, but you have a whole chapter on nutrition. You present a bunch of data on how, as if we're obese, we eat crap, so you present a lot of that data. I want to go through things in sort of lightning round-ish.
Yeah, okay.
And present a bunch of topics. All right. What is the problem with ultra-processed foods?
The problem? Bad for you, okay? I mean, it's just that simple. It reduces the microbiome. It accelerates cognitive decline and impairment. It, increases obesity levels. I mean, that's the bottom line, and does not contain a lot of nutrients.
And why do we eat so much more ultra-processed food in the United States than other countries?
I'm not sure I have a full why, but I would say the following. We invented it. So we have a lot of large corporations that are built around it. We heavily subsidize the inputs. So corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, the inputs that ConAgra, I believe they're in this building, and hopefully I'll get out alive. That they make and then they sell to the manufacturers like Kraft and Company to make these things that taste good. They've also figured out, and they've done great research. They've figured out how to make them addictive. I mean, there are literally people who are addicted to ultra-processed foods. They highlight or light up the same reward pathway that people get in other addictive elements like illicit drugs.
You love yogurt.
Yes.
Why?
Number one food. Why? It's dairy. It's got, again, lots of protein. It's got lots of other nutrients, whether it's calcium, vitamin D, and it's fermented. So it's good for your microbiome. It's also associated with, it's the best food to eat for dieters, leads to most weight decrease. So there's really no downside to yogurt. You shouldn't eat the yogurt with all the, fruit additives that are just basically a lot of sugar with a little flavoring to them. That I don't do.
Dairy, good?
Yeah, as I said, I'm high on dairy. I do think RFK Jr. got that one right. I know that he's coming in for some crap about it, and definitely some of the people who were on the advisory board of that have conflicts of interest, but that doesn't make that this message is wrong.
So the fad of the 2025 maybe is protein.
Yeah.
Protein?
Yeah. It's idiotic what the fad has done. Almost all Americans get enough protein. There's some small pockets that don't, but really, first of all, you don't need as much, and here RFK Jr. is wrong. You don't need 1.6 grams unless you're training for a marathon or something, 1.6 grams per kilogram. You need about 1 gram, maybe a little less, something like, if you're 70 kilogram per person, you need, 70 grams of protein, and you get that. On average, Americans eat, I think I say in the book, 12 ounces of meat per day, more than enough. Every unit of things, about 6, 7, 8 grams. So 1 egg, 6 grams. 1 ounce of beef or salmon, 7 to 8 grams. So it's not hard to get enough protein. My typical breakfast, 2 eggs, a piece of whole wheat toast, berries, hard hemps, and yogurt, and that comes in at about 25, 26 grams of protein. It's like, yeah, okay. I haven't even started really the day. That's a lot of protein.
Carbs.
Yeah, a lot of people are against carbs. We have too much carbs because we have a lot of ultra-processed foods. We have to decrease the carbs for that reason. But, complex carbohydrates are good. Some carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, are not good. And it's that simple. They, sort of bump up your glycemic index very high. In that category, right, is the potato. I am, and I will tell you, I'm in a minority here, okay? Marion Nestle, one of the great nutritionists at NYU, she read the chapter, she wrote, why do you attack the potato? It saved the Irish. And my brother-in-law, who ran a bunch of vegetarian fast casual restaurants in Boston called Clover, also was like, Zeke's wrong about the potato. Potatoes, not complicated carbohydrates, very simple. We way overeat them. And so I'm very much against it. But you did notice, right? I had the French fries. Yes, occasionally you can have potatoes. My favorite are roasted, but sweet potatoes way better. And anyway, don't give up your carbs. Make them complicated and whole grain.
What is a Zeke bar?
The Zeke bar?
Yeah.
Oh, so about a decade ago, I began collaborating with a guy named Sean Ashkenazi, who is in Springfield, Missouri, to create a chocolate bar. I had been an MC at something called the Good Food Awards, which are awards for artisanal makers of, condiments and coffee and ciders and what else? Just about everything, olive oils and cheeses and charcuterie. And he happened to win the award that year for chocolate. And I said, I grew up on chocolate. My dad loved chocolate. My dad had studied in Switzerland. And I'd love to make a chocolate. Never done it. And he, right. Hundreds of people have said they'd like to make a chocolate with me. Well, he hadn't met an Emanuel before. And I just pestered him. And I said, listen, Sean, you've never made a bar with beans from Madagascar. Let's go to Madagascar. Let's get beans and we'll make a bar together. And we did. And the first bar, Zeke 1, was pretty good. It was very robust and with a long tail to it. I've now made 4 bars. We're working on the 5th bar. But the 4th bar, I really hit it. I don't want to brag again, but I will. I hit it out of the park. It's chocolate, 65% chocolate, and has dried cherry in it. And everyone who's tasted it, it's won a number of awards, and everyone who's tasted it thinks it's the best bar Sean has made. And Sean's been in the business. He's one of the original bean to bar guys in the United States. He's been in the business for over 20 years.
I mean, that sounds delicious.
It's a great bar. I mean, so anyway, you can go to Ashkenazi Chocolates. I make nothing from it. All the money goes to charity.
So your advice on exercise is interesting because it's very clearly more is not better.
Better, that's right.
So what is this general philosophy on that, and what's your exercise routine?
So you need 3 kinds of exercise. You need aerobic exercise, good for the heart, lungs, vasculature. You need strength training, and you need balance and flexibility. You need each of those components. Now, you all know, the CDC recommends 70 minutes of vigorous exercise or 150 minutes per week of moderate exercise, and that's pretty accurate. The important thing, which you will not get from a lot of the wellness gurus, is that you get benefits from exercise, and then you get a plateau. Too much exercise does, more and more exercise is not going to get you more health. It's actually, your increase in longevity plateaus out. And it actually means that you're losing in 2 ways. One, you're putting yourself at risk for repetitive motion injuries, knee problems, tennis elbow, whatever you have. And you're wasting a lot of time, because the time you're spending exercising, you could be spending doing other meaningful, valuable things in life. And I don't know anyone in this room who doesn't feel time constrained, right? There are many things you want to do that you can't do because you're time constrained. So that's the aerobic. The other thing I recommend, and I think this is really important when you think about your exercise routine, is try to get exercise trifectas. What's an exercise trifecta? Well, you can do the strength training and the aerobic exercise together, right? Ever see a swimmer, right? Pretty built at the top, right? Because they're getting a lot of strength training and the aerobics. I happen to be a bicyclist. I get a lot of aerobics, but I also get a lot of lower body strength training. So I have to augment a little in the upper body, but that's about it. So my exercise routine, that's what you wanted to know? I do about 20 minutes of yoga every morning. I happen to like Peloton yoga. And I often add on a 5-minute core part. So 25 minutes in the morning, done. And then I will do, if it's cold out like now, I won't go bicycling, which is my main mode now of aerobic exercise. I will do 20 minutes 3 times a week on the Peloton. Not everyone can fit in 20 minutes, a few times a week. And then in the, beginning sort of towards the end of March, when the weather is nicer, I will get on my bike in Saturday and Sunday, and I'll go out for an hour and 45 minutes riding in the country one way or another. I bought a car during COVID. Why'd I buy a car? So I could transport my bike so I could go riding in the country. So
I point out, I thought it was interesting. You said every couple of years you crash on your bike.
Unfortunately,
You've broken ribs, your pelvis, you've torn ligaments, all sorts of stuff.
Yes.
And I was thinking, but he probably wears a helmet, which is why it's not in the "Don't be a schmuck" chapter.
Yeah. I like going fast, and fast is 17 to 20 miles an hour. And we go for, 30, 35, 40 miles, depending upon the day when we're outside. This, almost exactly a year ago, 14 months ago, November 10th, 2024, I hit a rock about the size of a grapefruit under a bunch of leaves on a path. There were no cars, thankfully, and I was going 19 miles an hour. You can see it on the tracker. Yes, fortunately, I did not go over the bike. I went to the side because I didn't hit the rock straight on, and 2 displaced fractured ribs, ripped ligament in my left shoulder, and eventually we found out that there were two fractures of my pelvis. That wasn't initially diagnosed. My wife says, I knew you were injured. You didn't go to work the next day. Yeah, it took me about 4 months to heal. And I didn't ride. I'm back to riding normally.
Ouch.
So, yeah. Well, that's not the worst one.
Oh, well.
The worst one is I was riding, and I can't explain it still to this day. I have to replay it in my head. My front wheel hit a small pothole and went over the road guard on the side, and I impaled myself on the I-beam behind, and yeah, right into the sternum. Fortunately, it was in the sternum, down, smashed here, and there was a fair amount of blood, but I got up and I was like, I don't have a pneumothorax. I can breathe. Both sides are moving. It's okay. I'm feeling good. And my wife is calling 911, and it's like, no, don't call 911. And I'm okay. I'm really, you got to go to the emergency room. I don't have to go to the emergency room. Yeah, I'm a physician, and I'm a therapeutic nihilist. Doctors are only dangerous. Eventually, we agreed that we would go to the emergency room. My half of the deal is, yes, I will go, but I will ride my bike there. I am not going to go to the emergency. So we rode 5 miles to the emergency room. They had this, very fancy bike sitting there in the emergency room lobby, and I won. Nothing, no permanent damage done.
A therapeutic nihilist. I love that. So, which of your brothers follows your advice more closely?
Oh, well, Ari asks once a week. I mean, he's got some mishigas, that's going around that what do you think of this? And what do you think of that? And, but his basic philosophy is, I'll try it if it won't hurt me. So, and it's not crazy. He's got an unlimited amount of money, and so he can try everything. He's got a hyperbaric chamber in his place. He's got the red lights, the green lights, the orange lights. I don't know. He's got everything, and seems to work for him.
So there's another book you wrote previously on your family.
Yeah.
And your brothers and how you're growing up, and it's an extraordinary set of brothers. I don't know how this happens, but 3 guys, and they're sort of top of their fields in totally different fields. For the parents in the room, like me, so to what do you attribute? What did your parents do? What should we do as parents so that, I'm sure there's a lot of issues too if I asked your brother, but like as a general concept.
So the first thing the first thing I would say is, look, a lot of it is genetic. Every parent knows, kid comes out, they got a personality, and yes, I just got off the phone with my original research assistant at Penn, and he said, yeah, well, we have an 18-month-old daughter, and she rules the house. She tells everyone what they're doing, and it's like, where did that come from? It's certainly not emulating the parents by 18 months. So the first thing I would say, and this is each one of these things is important, is none of the Emanuel brothers were not stars coming out of high school. No one said, oh, you got to watch those Emanuel brothers. They're all really stars. They're all going to succeed. I graduated pretty close to the top of the class. I wasn't number 1, but I graduated pretty high. Ram, no. Ari, no. Let me tell you another thing. I don't know how many of you got kids who are taking SATs, thinking about college. Everyone talks about, we need objective measures, no more of this subjectivity and getting into college. We need SAT scores, and, all the big colleges reinstitute SAT scores. Let me tell you a secret. The Emanuel brothers, the bottom end of those SAT scores. We are not good at standardized testing. Okay? We're just not, right? I probably got the highest in my math SAT, which was, a 720. It's good, but it ain't, not shooting the lights out. And the verbal was below 600, right? And my brothers did a lot worse, okay? So all of this quote unquote objectivity, it doesn't measure what's important. That's the first thing. The second thing is don't push early. Very, very important message. There's a recent study of athletes, and those kids whose parents really pushed them, got them, and focused them on one sport, almost uniformly burn out. They get bored by it. They get frustrated. Those who are sort of a little of this, a little of that, and then they sort of find their groove much, much better. So this sort of hyper-specialization early, really dumb idea. So that's one thing I would say. Present opportunities, multiple opportunities. Don't overdo it. Now, obviously, every so often there's Mozart, and you don't. But they'll tell you if they're Mozart. They will sit down and play at 3 years old. I raised my kids with no TV, and they've raised their kids with no TV. It was pre-cell phone era. No one had a personal computer. They had to interact. One of the important things my mom did is she would shoo us out of the house. Go play. All right. 5 o'clock dinner, and I was the oldest, so 5 o'clock dinner, and I could tell time. You're gonna be home. But that forced us to talk, interact with other people, negotiate social things. What are we playing? How are we doing it? When fights come out, on the basketball court or whatever, you have to negotiate it out. Those are really important skills, really important skills. And we would play, football in the street and baseball in the street and basketball, whatever. And we'd play with our friends. Totally, totally important. We slept in the same room for the first 10 years. We had a separate room which had our desk in it, and so we were expected to be serious about our work. So I think those are really. We had family meals. When I raised my daughters, breakfast every day, dinner every night together, unless one of their parents were on the road talking or whatever we did on the road. Yeah, I think those are really, really important measures. And you got to be there for your kids. I'll tell you, I have 3 daughters. For parents of 3 daughters, I trained them in Taekwondo. They went every Friday. I actually did Taekwondo with that. For the first 6 months, I took them to Taekwondo, and I sat there. And then, it dawned on me like a real genius here. I'm wasting my time here learning Taekwondo. Why don't I learn Taekwondo? What's the problem? It turns out to be really helpful if you learn something and your kids turn out, they might be better than you. You're both learning the same thing. My youngest daughter was, she was fabulous at fighting me because she knew, how could she beat me? Well, I was longer and bigger and taller than her, so she would crowd me. She would just get in right close. And it's a very interesting thing for you to do. We did at Lil Street. We had every Sunday a clay making class all together for 2.5 years. And consequently, my kids are they are very artistic. None of them are artists, but they're very artistically inclined. So doing things with your kids where you're not necessarily better than them. You can't dominate them in a way is a very, very useful, good method of bonding and also boosting up their self-confidence.
I think Jonathan Haidt would approve of
absolutely,
all
100%,
of that.
yes.
All right, my last question. Most of what you have in this book has nothing really to do with our healthcare system.
Yeah.
So, which is not helpful for keeping people healthy or for wellness or for longevity. So if you could wave a magic wand and change something in our healthcare system, what would it be?
there's not a thing, first of all. We have to completely change the healthcare system. It's built on the wrong foundation in many, many ways. Employer-sponsored insurance, we pay too much for interaction, not for outcomes. The choices are wrong, the co-pays are all wrong, the incentive structure sucks. So everything needs to be changed. If I had to identify the three big problems in the system, the biggest problem is what I call fragmentation. We've got fragmentation of coverage. There are literally hundreds of different ways of people getting insurance, which means there's fragmentation of payment. Every one of those mechanisms has a different way of paying, which means there's fragmentation of quality assessment and on and on. That adds hugely. I mean, there's a reason 20% of our healthcare budget goes to administration. That's the reason. All that fragmentation leads to a lot of duplication and administrative nonsense. Second, we have a system that was built up in the from roughly 1920 to about 1970, those 50 years, and we focused on the health problems in the 1920s, which were diarrhea, pneumonia, tuberculosis, car accidents, because that was just when cars were starting and the accident rate was just enormous because the rules of the road hadn't been established. Those are acute problems. But we developed vaccinations, antibiotics, sanitation improved, reduced the risk of infections. And yet the infrastructure, the hospital, the specialist-focused infrastructure remained. And that's one of the things, legacies we're living with now. You know, specialists and hospitals are 45% of the healthcare dollars. They deal with acute problems. They don't deal with chronic problems. And yet 85 to 90 cents of every dollar is for patients who have acute illnesses. So we've got to refocus, and the acute illnesses are all because of bad wellness. We have to focus on primary and secondary prevention, and people have to be paid to keep people healthy. We have to change the food system so that it's much harder to get obese, among other things. And so all of that you have to really comprehensively reform the healthcare system. There's not a single magical bullet that, you know, oh, if I did just this, the whole thing would be better. And Americans love magic bullets, but this is one where what you really need is a complete revolution. We thought that the Affordable Care Act is a revolution. To really fix the system, you're going to need something way more radical than the Affordable Care Act. And that's really what I'm working on now is, can you delineate a sort of reasonable outline for what that would look like? And then more importantly, how you might get there. I think I have an answer, but we'll find out.
I look forward to that. Say for everyone here, we probably touched on 10% of the topics in his book. There's a lot in there. I know you're going to enjoy it. Ezekiel Emanuel, thank you.
Thank you
so much for joining us.